Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about the Easter story. I'm going to go quite quickly through this talk, and I'm going to mention at various times different resources that you might want to look at to check out some of the stuff that I'm saying. If you would like me to send them to you, or me to let you know you're interested in listening to the podcast I mentioned or reading any of the books I mentioned, then just get in contact with me. If I don't have your email or you don't have mine, fill out a Get Connected card. And I will send them to you. I will send you a link to listen to the things that I'm talking about, or a link to buy the books I'm talking about. I want to say that particularly because I'm conscious that there might be some of us here who are not actually sure whether what I'm saying is true. And I want to give you a chance to check that out. So do get in contact with me, and I will send you the resources to check out what I'm saying. So I always offer a 1 or 2 sentence summary of everything I'm going to say in today's service, in today's talk. And this is what I'm saying in this morning's talk. Easter explains our desire for hope and a happy ending. So go and make the resurrection present in your schools, your homes, your families, and your workplaces. Easter explains our desire for hope and a happy ending. So go and make the resurrection present in your schools, your homes, your families, and your workplaces. Easter explains our desire for hope and happy endings. So go and make the resurrection present in your schools, your homes, your families, and your workplaces. If you want to have a Bible passage open in front of you, this is the one I read at the beginning of the service, and this is the one I'm going to be talking about. It's Matthew 28 and verses 1 to 10. Matthew 28 and verses 1 to 10. So you can open that in front of you and have a read if you'd like while I'm speaking. Christianity is a faith. It's one of the great world faiths. It's a bit different, however, from most other religions or worldviews, because it doesn't just encourage us to believe certain things that are mystical about God or about the universe. Christians say that something really happened at a particular time and in a particular place. Now, by training, I'm a barrister. That means I'm a lawyer. So is my wife. We did our training in going to court. I've been to court lots of times. And every single one of those trials was about something that had happened. And almost always there was a dispute about what had happened. And so we went back and we looked at the evidence for what had happened. And we listened to the people who were there. And we read the things that were written. And we came to a conclusion about what had happened. That's what faith is. Faith is what historians do when they write about the past. Faith is what juries do when they give verdicts in criminal cases. Faith is what you are doing now when you sat down on these chairs. It's about trusting yourself to something because you believe the evidence for it. So a jury exercises faith when they give a guilty verdict or a not guilty verdict, because they believe the witnesses, and so they act in response. It's an everyday occurrence. And we actually lock people up for their whole lives based on an act of faith. That's how reasonable faith is. It's how normal it is. Every single one of you now is at serious risk of injury. You guys at the top, you're at serious risk of injury. I can see Sophia and Lewis up there. You guys, if those bleacher seatings fail, you're going to fall quite a long way. And there's going to be quite a lot of metal underneath you, and you're going to be quite badly hurt. Thank goodness we're here with faith to pray for you. They're taking a huge risk. Why are they doing it? Well, they've looked at the evidence. They can see all you other people sitting there nicely on these seats, and they think those seats don't look like they're going to fall down. Everyone else seems to trust them. I came here last week, and they didn't fall down. I've assessed the evidence. I'm going to sit down and entrust myself to this seat. Now, it's not risk-free. There's no way you can know. But you can look at what's happened, and you can look at what's been said, and you can look at what people are doing, and you can think, well, I trust myself to that. It's faith. Christianity is this type of faith. In that sense, it's a bit different from other things that are like philosophies. So this is a one for the thinkers among you, but something like Marxism is not like that. right? It's a belief system. I believe something about the world, and I'm going to act in accordance with it. It's perfectly respectable. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's true. But it's a belief system. Christianity isn't like that. Christianity is a claim about something that happened. It's a trial. The resurrection of Jesus is a historical fact. It can be examined. That doesn't mean it can be proved by a scientific experiment. Again, this is another one for those of you who are thinking. Scientific experiments don't ever prove something that happened in the past. What they do is look at something happening in the present. So they do an experiment on something that happens now, and they look at what happens. So when you burn paper, it burns because you apply heat to paper and it burns in an environment with oxygen. And they look at that and they think, well, maybe that's an explanation for everything else that's burned. But what they're actually doing is testing the present. It's not a scientific experiment. Nothing in history is a scientific experiment. It's a historical inquiry. It can be tested. In the same way that a jury can test the evidence before deciding someone's guilty, you can test the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. One former professor of history at Oxford University described the resurrection as the best attested fact in history. Maybe you're a young person and you're thinking, this all sounds good, but he's a barrister. He's supposed to persuade people. I can feel myself being persuaded, and he persuades people of things, and maybe he's not telling the truth. So go and look at what other people have said. You can start with any of these books if you're a reader. This is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. He was a journalist, an investigative journalist who didn't believe in God and went away and looked at the evidence for the resurrection and came to believe in Jesus, and he wrote a book about it. Quit his job as a journalist and started trying to persuade people that Jesus really was alive. This is by J. Warner Wallace. This is a new one. This is Cold Case Christianity. He's a homicide detective. He's someone who literally worked with evidence, works out what crimes happen, and he's gone and examined the case for Jesus. And he said, I've become convinced of this. I'm going to give my life to Jesus, and I'm going to write a book explaining why, as a detective who inquires into crimes, I believe this is true. Or maybe you're more of a philosopher. You like to sit there and think, we don't smoke pipes anymore, but secretly deep down you would quite like to. Just so that you could do this. And think about things. This is William Lane Craig. He's one of the 50 most influential philosophers in the world. Not my ranking. He wrote this book called The Sun Rises. William is a brilliant, Bill Craig, he likes to be called Bill. He's a brilliant philosopher. He's a terrible comedian. It's an awful pun. It's a book about how, as a philosopher, he's come to believe that the resurrection of Jesus is true. I put another book up here by a woman called Rebecca McLaughlin. Full disclosure, she and I were at university together. That's not why I'm recommending her book. I never met her then, or at least I don't remember meeting her then. She has a podcast of this book. So maybe you're someone who sits there and thinks, Phil, you've got time to read books. I don't have time to read books. I'm a busy mum, or I just can't be bothered. But I can listen to podcasts while I'm washing up, or I'm on the bus to school, or I'm going to work, or whatever. I'm just bored at work and want to pretend that I'm doing something, and when my boss looks in. Listen to Rebecca's podcast called Confronting Christianity. She interviews people, interesting people like nuclear physicists, and asks them what they think about Jesus. It's fascinating. Again, if you want any of these resources, ask me at the end. This is a guy who is a super brain. You can tell that. I mean, look at the picture. I'm not going to make a comment. He's super smart. He's a nuclear physicist, Dr. Daniel Ang, a Harvard PhD and researcher at the University of Maryland. He put it this way. He says, however, once one removes the requirement that some non-supernatural explanation must be true, in other words, if you come to the resurrection of Jesus with an open mind, not with closed-minded, not blindly asserting that there can be no God, as the illiberal, irrational, atheistic point of view does, that conclusion is not permitted, and therefore I can't find it. As soon as you stop doing that, he says, it seems to me much clearer that the theory that Jesus rose from the dead is a more plausible explanation than any of the other ones. Far from undermining my scientific work, my faith gives it a purpose, a meaning, and ultimate foundation. It's interesting, isn't it? As soon as you come with an open mind, he says, like a scientist would, or should, you find that this is really plausible. Well, what about this guy? This is Ian Hutchinson. He works at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He became a Christian while he was studying at Cambridge. He is probably the smartest person we've ever featured in one of these sermons. He's the real-life Dr. Octopus. He wants the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. He worked on nuclear fusion. He's probably the leading scientist in the world, or one of them, on nuclear fusion at MIT. He literally wrote the book, 200 peer-reviewed articles. As far as I'm aware, he doesn't have 4 large mechanical tentacles coming out of his back, but I've never seen a full-scale picture of him, so I can't promise that. He said this: there was a scientific revolution was led and carried out by believing Christians. None of the other explanations of the resurrection is a persuasive explanation of the historical facts. What I'm saying is, there's a very, very, very good chance that everything Christians believe about Jesus is true. And if you're wondering about that, and you're sitting there thinking, I can't make that leap, there are loads of people who've been in your position, and they've made resources to help you. Okay, so check it out. But in some ways, the truthfulness of the resurrection is the most boring thing about it. All right, it happened, it's amazing, great. What I want to look at is why it explains who we are. The so what question. And also the death and resurrection of Jesus explains humanity, explains people in a more satisfying and true way than any of the alternatives. It explains you and me in a more satisfying and true way than any of the alternatives. So I want you to think for a minute of your favorite movie. Here are some of mine. I've thrown Cinderella in there for Abby. It's all about you, love. Think of your favorite movie. It might be Batman. There's Batman on the left. It might be Cinderella. She's there on the right. It looks a little bit like Batman and Cinderella are making their way to fight each other. That's a movie that I would pay to see. Unfortunately, it's not been made yet. It's Die Hard. That's Die Hard in the bottom corner. The Return of the Jedi. That's in the middle. Or even a horror movie that you might have seen. The chances are it has a happy ending or a resolution where the good guys win. Right? The chances are that your favorite movie has a resolution where the good guys win. Might not, but the chances are that it does. Now, there are, of course, movies where the good guys don't win at the end. This is The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not going to tell you what happens in that scene, in case you don't know. If you haven't seen it, watch it. That's Avengers Infinity War. If you've got 1,600 hours of your time, you can watch the saga going up to that point. These are movies where the good guys don't win at the end. The bad guys win. And you know what we always know when that happens? There's definitely a sequel coming. Right? There's always a sequel coming. You think about that. That's interesting, isn't it? Why? Because we know the story isn't finished. You get to the point where the baddies win, Luke Skywalker falls out the bottom of a space station or whatever, or someone turns to dust, and you think, oh, he was a goodie. Can't possibly be over. I'll wait till next year and they'll take another tenner off me. It's so common we don't even notice it. We long for happy endings. We seem to intuitively know that they're true, that if it's not a good ending, the story isn't over. Why? I mean, it's crazy. I don't want to be grim about it. This universal desire, this universal intuition that this is the way it's supposed to be somehow, and it is universal. That's why these movies take money in every country in the world, because it is a universal desire. It's harder than you might think to explain. Think about the natural world. This is not going to end well for the zebra. We saw a cyclist out yesterday dressed as a zebra. I said it should be a lion chasing him. But it's not going to end well for the zebra cyclist in that situation. Right? There is no happy ending for the zebra. This is what the natural world is like. Right? This is why it's the Lion King, right? Because you have to make the hero the lion, because the zebra is going to get eaten. And the kids are going to cry. Right? Because there are no happy endings in the real world, in the natural world. In the natural world, everyone dies. Planets die, everything turns to dust, it's all entropy, and everything's meaningless. Happy Easter. So why do you intuit that a happy ending is part of the way things are supposed to be? Not just that you'd like it to be the case, but that somehow it's not quite right if it's not. Everything's out of joint. It's not the natural world. Now, you might never have thought about this, but it's something to be listened to. This is what C.S. Lewis says. He says, creatures are born with a desire. are not born with a desire unless satisfaction for that desire exists. In other words, you don't want things that can't be satisfied. Right? That's perfectly true. Right? You get thirsty because there are drinks. Your body's telling you it wants something. Your mind is telling you it wants something, so you can get it. You satisfy the desire. Desires are there to point you to something. It says a baby feels hunger, well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well, there's such a thing as sex. I've got a dog. He wants to go for walks because there are walks. He wants to scratch himself because he's got claws so he can scratch himself. He wants to fight cats because there are cats. Right? Every desire points to something that's going to fulfill that desire. That's the point of desires. So if we find ourselves having a desire that can't be satisfied in any other way, we ought to go and look for the source of it. What is the thing that's going to satisfy it? If nothing in this world satisfies me, the most probable explanation, C.S. Lewis says, is that I was made for another world. You want happy endings. I want happy endings. Because somehow that's the way the story is meant to finish. A deep, profound intuition in everyone that the zebra's story is not our story. That our story is different. We sense evil is wrong because it is. I had a law professor at Cambridge who taught legal philosophy. He stood up in the first thing and he was in front of a room of kids who were basically impossible to like, including me. Insufferable is the word I would use for us. Insufferable know-it-alls if I was wanted to use two words. He stood up, wearily said, I just want to deal with one thing first. Some of you are going to tell me there's no such thing as real right and wrong, that it's all just in our heads and everything's relative. He said, I'm perfectly happy to have that discussion, but you need to tell me with your hand on your heart that chattel slavery is fine. If you can't do that, then you're boring. Let's go on with the real course. Do you know what happened? All these smarmy 21-year-olds who were used to being the most clever person in the room turned to one another. No one was willing to stand up and say chattel slavery was actually morally fine, so we got on with the course. We believe things are evil because they are. Moral relativism is bunk. It's nonsense. The emperor has no clothes. It's advanced as an argument by people who rely entirely on other people behaving morally. Right? And they take the luxury of that to argue that there's no such thing as morality. Someone needs to stand up and say the emperor's got no clothes, they are naked, shivering in the wind. We believe things are wrong because they are wrong. We believe that darkness and death need to be confronted because they do. We believe that the story of humanity is one that's working towards redemption and healing and happy endings because it is. It makes sense of the world around us. We want death and darkness and sin and wickedness and shame and guilt to be overcome because that's the story we're in. That's the story we're all in. We live in a world in which Jesus did rise from the dead. In the Easter story, we see all other stories represented and fulfilled. We see ourselves represented, our deepest longings, our most fervent hopes epitomized, perfected, and redeemed in Jesus Christ. God comes into a world of wickedness and destruction, of hurt and death in order to defeat it and redeem it. The natural world ends with death, but into that world, Jesus speaks life. And every single one of us is desperate to hear that word. We live in a world that is crucifying itself and its people every day, longing for resurrection, and in the story of Jesus we find it. You think the way you do, you long for this ending, and so do I, because this is the story we're a part of. This is who we are. This is the reality of the world. You want resurrection and not death because it's a deep truth, the deep reality that underpins everything. What C.S. Lewis would call the deep magic of the universe. When we begin to understand this, it has the potential radically to change how we see ourselves, God, and the world around us. The faith, I would even say the knowledge that Jesus rose from the dead, changes everything. You see, it changes our experience of hope. If you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, it doesn't matter how dark a valley you find yourself in. Mentally, physically. A couple of years ago, Pope Francis recognized as saints the Coptic martyrs who were executed by ISIS on a beach, singing hymns to Christ because they would not convert. It doesn't matter how profound the valley is. If there's resurrection at the end of it, there's hope. Jesus has overcome death. What else is there to fear? We could be people who are hopeful and confident even when the world around us is painful. The world might be going to hell in a handcart, but Jesus Christ has been to hell. And he's defeated it. That kind of hope becomes yours when you put your trust in Jesus and follow him and get baptized. It changes how we show hope and share hope with others. If you live as if the resurrection is true, you live as one who does not despair but knows hope, you can be the way that someone else finds hope. I listened to Ian Hutchinson's testimony this morning. In case you've forgotten who he is, he's the nuclear physicist, the leading nuclear physicist in the world, one of them. He said it began with his friends who were Christians when he was at Cambridge, and he just found their lives profoundly attractive. If you know hope, other people want hope, they will find hope from you. You can be the way that someone else in pain comes to know mercy and love of the God who bore their pain and offers them life in return. Now, you might think, well, that's easy for you to say, Phil. You've had a charmed life. And I have. What I would say is following Jesus is not easy, but actually he pays his debts. So, yeah, my life's great. I love it. It's been hard along the way, but God is good. So don't listen to me. This is my mentor. This is Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI. He suffered under persecution of the Nazis when he was just a child. His father was victimized and expelled from his work and so forth because he refused to become a Nazi in the 1930s. 30 years later, as he became one of the leading archbishops in the Roman Catholic Church, he went to Auschwitz and stood in the death camps with Pope John Paul II. And there in the midst of that great monument to death, that testament to the horror of human evil, they celebrated communion and testified to the hope of life. This is what he said about it. He said, the answer to an oft-asked question became clear to me as well. How often has it been said, can anyone still believe in a good God after Auschwitz? I understood. Precisely because Auschwitz exists, we need faith. We need the presence of the resurrection and the victory of love. Only the resurrection can make the star of hope rise that allows us to live. Making the resurrection present, my dear friends. This, in fact, completely describes the essence of what it means to be a priest, and every single one of you is a priest of Christ. Priest is someone who makes Christ present to other people. It means most profoundly being able to bring about this reality on the killing field of the world, in which death and its powers reap a continual harvest. It means bringing about the presence of resurrection, and thus the answer of life that is stronger than death. As you go from this place this Easter morning, I want you to rejoice in the joy of the season. I want you to eat the copious chocolate and sweets that I hope you have waiting for you at home. I fasted for chocolate for the whole of Lent. I ate a chocolate egg for breakfast this morning. All I can say was it was unwise. I feel a little bit sick. I hope you have a great day. But I want you to go tomorrow and make the resurrection present in your schools, in your homes, in your valleys, in your trials, in your families, in your workplaces.